Okay, I'm going to be talking about the New York City Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. The research question, uh, the subsidies, I'll show you that the subsidies are economically regressive. And so the question is, why do these subsidies continue if they're economically regressive? And then the proposal is that maybe Bourdieu's notion of social distinction. The reason the subsidies continue is because of the social distinction it brings to those who participate in the subsidy process. Both the technocrats and bureaucrats, the taxpayer, and of course the recipient all seem to get distinction, even though they're economically regressive. So let's frame this and discuss the motivation behind the research question. We have this popular meme in culture, which is elites. You hear this a lot in political language, that there's the elite or the ruling class. And of course, that follows the British utilitarianism, where you have leaders and followers, or the rules and the ruled. British utilitarianism is different than French utilitarianism. French utilitarianism is about the search for order and meaning, where British utilitarianism is a concept of political order, class-based order. And I'm also interested in Virginia political economy, which describes this British utilitarian state as an administrative state or a churning state. Murray Rothbard calls it the welfare warfare state. And then economic historians say that during World War II, the United States created war socialism, and that has continued through today, that type of welfare warfare state, or what Max Weber calls the modern nation state. So my motivation, that's the rhetoric or the language that we'll be looking at today, or that I'll be using to discuss this. Stylized facts, demographic trends, where we ask, is the administrative state sustainable? This is New York City and the United States. We'll see that the United States between 2000 and 2020 is growing at about 18% population-wise, where New York City is only growing at half that amount. And then during the COVID era, we see a slight growth in the United States population, but a negative growth in New York City. So is the administrative state sustainable? Not if people are leaving your jurisdiction. It's not sustainable. And we'll see that in the United States writ large, that places like New York State, California, and Illinois are losing population as they go to Texas, Florida, South Carolina, and Idaho. And the outlier there is Washington, D.C., which has population increase, of course. Just follow the money. So here's the commissioner of the New York City's Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, specifically talking about film and television. She says, or they say, that they want an equitable recovery for all New Yorkers. Equitable is the word. And the data for this comes from the impact study of 2021. So a little background on the office. New York City has about $100 billion budget, about 13,000 per person. The Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment has the film subsidies is about $90 per person for those living in the 8 million living in New York City, pay about $90 each. You can write off 75% of your costs as long as 75% of your on-screen is filmed in New York. And you'll see that it's corporate capitalism, because the recipients include very well-known and established media firms. So the average income, again, this is from MoMA's own data, the average income for those who receive grants or tax breaks, subsidies, is $121,000 per year, whereas the average income for those living in New York City is only $91,000 a year. So there you'll see that there's a inequality. The MOM programs create inequality. You'll see that for private employers, that's $81,000 per year, which means that public employers pay more than private employers in New York City, and about 40% of the New York City budget goes to public schools, and 20% of the New York City budget goes to the subway system, which are highly unionized. Public unions are very powerful in New York City and New York State. So if you use the United States as comparison, then people receiving MOM subsidies make twice as much as the average American. Again, inequality creation. So both, here's the United States national debt over the last 100 years, and you'll see starting 2018 or 2008, with the bailouts after the financial crisis, the United States has been running up deficit spending, increasing the money supply. The central bank's been buying US government bonds, and so anyway, we have a deficit financed government spending binge over the last 14 years. So the reason that the correct jurisdiction might be the United States is because both New York City and New York State are required to submit balanced budgets, whereas the United States obviously doesn't have to. So what's important about this graph is you'll see that prior to the COVID era, that the city received about 9% of its budget from the federal government. And then after the COVID era is now receiving about 9%. But during the COVID era, you'll see that 2021 and 2022, the federal government has funded New York City at a much higher rate. And you'll see that that only occurs 2021 and 2022 when there's a blue administration. So you don't get those transfers during the COVID era when there's a red administration. So Richard Wagner, Virginia political economist, describes how national debt and the budget process leads to a faction, or what we see today, blue states versus red states, the national debt and budget process. So how can subsidies claim to create equity? Subsidies are net benefits to those that receive them and a cost to everyone else. Those employed in the subsidized projects gain higher income, and subsidies create a race to the bottom in competition with other jurisdictions for subsidies, right? I'll give you 100 million in subsidies to film your project here, and then Virginia says, oh, I'll give you 110 million. So it's a race to the bottom. How can that create equity is the question. Why do subsidies continue if they create inequality or inequity? Art subsidies create social distinction for those that are involved in the subsidy process. Here's a quote from Bourdieu talking about the class system. Those with more social capital and cultural capital are seen as deservingly the leaders who make decisions for others. You can read that. Especially those with higher education are put on are seen by others as those that should be leading, that should be making the subsidy determinations, determining what is culture. So Bourdieu says this British utilitarianism is a social distinction, sociology. It should be that way. You should have a ruling class. Conclusion. Cultural elites work to reproduce and expand their own power as the dominant class and use cultural production in this process. People are voting with their feet against the administrative state. Is the role of the cultural economist to justify or critique the inequality created by cultural policy? Thank you.